Thank you very much, and thank you, Bianca, and welcome, and thanks for coming out on this sunny Saturday morning. As Bianca said, my name is Murray. I work in the collections team here. We look after what we call the 3D objects, so the things you can pick up and hold. We're not so much with the aircraft. And our team look after the wide range of objects that include things like uniforms, memorabilia, medical equipment, escape and evasion equipment, safety and surface equipment, and part of that also is this group of objects known as trench art, which we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of what trench art is. We're going to look at some examples from our collection, and then we're going to zero in on a large collection of particularly high quality material made by Sergeant Ron Hermanns. So trench art is one of those concepts that has a broad definition because it includes a large number of objects and makers and motivations. It's sometimes known as soldier art or refugee art or prisoner of war art. Also falls under the heading of folk art. Specifically, we've got a definition here from anthropologist Nicholas Saunders, who wrote about trench art in World War I, defining it as any object made by soldiers, prisoners of war and civilians from war material or any other material, so long as their object and maker are associated in time and space with armed conflict or its consequences. A bit of a mouthful there, but covers absolutely the key points that we need it to. And our working definition that we use when cataloguing material is a piece of art or handicraft made by servicemen, prisoners of war or civilians during wartime, often using readily available war materials, manufactured directly related to armed conflict or its aftermath. So it's part of a very long tradition. For as long as there have been wars, there have been people making things during wars, and after the wars end, they use the materials in a recycling fashion for peaceful means. An immediate predecessor to the kind of material we'll be looking at today is from the Napoleonic Wars. Lots of prisoners were incarcerated across England, and at Norman Cross, prison in Huntingdonshire, prisoners made toys such as dolls' houses and model ships and domino sets out of things like bone and straw and carved wood, often for sale, and often made quite a good profit from it. Trench art flourished during World War II, particularly because of the numbers of people and the range of people involved in that conflict. It was well represented in World War II as well, and obviously in subsequent conflicts too. The name trench art is a little misleading. Some of the material would indeed have been made by soldiers in trenches, but the bulk of it was not. Most objects that were made by personnel would be behind the lines, where principally it was safer and they had more time and more access to materials. There were also work by prisoners of war and rehabilitative work by the wounded. But significantly more trench art was made by civilians. They were often in economic disarray, they'd lost their normal livelihood, and there was material all around them. Commercial operators also entered the scene. The Army and Navy stores in London would take orders to mount things like shell cases on specially prepared bases. A large amount, particularly of metal objects, was made in the interwar period, catering for demand for mementos from families who would travel to battle sites and conflict sites as part of the grieving process, and they would buy material there as well. So why would people do this? It's a combination of things, really. Time, expertise, incentive, resources, and a safe location to do it in. In the area of time, people had time on their hands and they got bored and needed something to do. But people also brought with them pre-existing skills. So there would be people, particularly amongst civilians who'd been enlisted, who had experience of using tools, of making things, who had artistic ability. There would be people who had been in civilian life, such as dentists or jewelers. So they had the ability pre-existing. They also had access through workshops and such to tools that could be used to make things, and materials where they could find them. There would have been a desire to make gifts for loved ones who were missed, and for souvenirs of places where people maybe hadn't expected they had found themselves. And for the entrepreneurial, there were also commercial opportunities. There was a buoyant market for souvenirs, and cottage industries started up during both World Wars, where groups of service people would get together to make objects for order. And a Sydney Morning Herald article from 1945 describes factories of 2 to 3 men operating in New Guinea to produce a range of jewellery that was sold by a salesman, sometimes known as a strafer, who would go around and take orders, particularly for personalised material. The Americans were frequently the customers of this trade, which was known as the foreigner trade, and it seems it could be pretty lucrative. The strafer might sell a locket for 50 shillings, the article describes, a coin and a shell bracelet for 70 shillings, and a ring for £3. He notes that £200 is a satisfactory day, and £1,000 in 3 days has been taken. The strafer would then go back to the workshop and would take a commission of up to 40% and then divvy the money out to the manufacturers. We have quite a large range of trench art in our collection from the Pacific, from New Zealand service people in the Pacific during World War II. Some of those items are purely utilitarian. The decorated shell case was the quintessential World War I trench art item, but it was used, the shell cases were used for quite plain purposes as well. You quite often see them as cigarette lighter covers. Here we've got a .303 caliber shell fashioned into a cigarette lighter. A trench art style type ashtray here, featuring a B-17 Flying Fortress made from ammo shells. The base of the ashtray is a 5-inch shell. The fuselage of the B-17 is a 5 caliber shell casing with canopy and engines made of .303 shells. The stylized propellers are circles of plastic, and the base of this shell is stamped June 1943. And here we have a set of salt and pepper shakers. They're made from chromed 0.5-inch caliber shells. 1 penny coins have been used on the base, which you can sort of just see through here. Showing the reverse of the coin, the tui and the kowhai tree. And the base of one of the pepper shaker has a 1 penny showing Britannia with her shield. And the projectile part of this shell pulls out to fill it with salt and or pepper. Acrylic was a popular and favourite material. Plexiglass, perspex, various trade names. It came from aircraft windscreens. And acrylic would be popular because it's easy to work. You can shape it quite easily. It will drill. You can engrave it. It softens at quite low temperatures, so this fantastic snake bracelet, which is part of a pear, has been made from a long coil of acrylic which has been softened and wound and then decorated at the end. It polishes to a nice finish as well, and in the absence of sandpaper you can use, and the people did use, sand and oil to create the finish. This is a tool that has been made to fashion acrylic. So this is a fantastic example of the trench art first to make the tool, to make the art. The label attached to this tool really sums up the trench art process in general, actually. It says, it's used for making of perspex foreigners, hearts, pendants, necklaces, crib boards, etc., for sending off or flogging off to the Aussies or the Yanks at a profit. Done during off-duty breaks in that forward combat area. A scarce and much sought-after commodity, perspex was filched from crashed aircraft. Airmen of the technical trades became very adept in working perspex, and their products were much sought after by the less skilled. A lot of the acrylic trench art we have falls into this category known as sweetheart jewellery. Because home and loved ones were on the minds of servicemen, sweetheart jewellery for wives and girlfriends was a popular item. So they were often heart-shaped brooches or pendants, and women would wear these symbols as signs of devotion and of patriotism. So on the left here we have a pendant with 4 small and 1 large acrylic hearts on a metal chain. The large heart is engraved from the back and it reads Margie, and it's flanked by rosemary leaves, symbolic of remembrance. This one purportedly made by Flight Sergeant Neville Charles Short for his wife Margaret while he was serving in the Pacific. We have a perspex heart here engraved with palm trees, redolent into the South Pacific, and engraved 1944 South Pacific for Eva. And this one was made by H.T. Allen. And at the top there, a perspex heart pendant with a chain, and that heart is inlaid with a brass king's crown and an eagle and the NZ symbols. These probably came off a button or a badge. Patriotic symbols were very common motifs. Sometimes they were used from filed down buttons or badges, or else they would be taken apart completely and heat set into the acrylic. So we have here a perspex bomb-shaped pendant. The shape of that's not so obvious against the white background, but it has the king's crown just through the middle. I have a cross here with an inlaid medical officer's badge, and down here is a set of earrings made from servicemen's buttons. So they're for non-pierced ears, so it's a small clamp that's been soldered on to the back there. And here are some examples of the eagle symbol being used, and we have a lot of brooches of this kind of eagle shape. There's also symbols that place the item in the area where the people were. So we see a lot of engraved palm trees, and this heart-shaped pendant, the reverse decoration, so it's been engraved and painted from the reverse, features Halovo, likely referring to Halovo Bay in the Solomon Islands. And this one was reportedly made by Flight Sergeant Neville Charles Short, while he was in the Pacific. Other materials that might have been available, up on the top left, this is turtle shell, standing in for tortoise shell, and this wing badge is made of coconut shell. So the quality of trench art really varies depending on the skills of its maker and the resources available to them and their general circumstances. And the museum's most remarkable collection of trench art was made by Sergeant Ron Hermanns. It consists of more than 50 pieces of jewellery and souvenirs, including button groups, understood to have been made by Ron during his time in service, and which he generously donated to the museum in 2010. And the pieces are fine examples of decorative work. Some of them are indeed on permanent display at the museum. So the one we just see here, this is a heart-shaped pendant made of 2 New Zealand halfpennies. They're put back to back and it's been chrome plated. So here's Ron. Ron was born in Canada in 1911. He came to Wellington with his family in 1914 and trained as an engineer and worked in the railway workshops in Wellington. In 1937, Ron joined the Wellington Territorial Squadron as an aircraft rigger, and he worked on the squadron's Blackbird and Baffins. In 1939, he was made liable for continuous service and he joined the RNZAF. At that point, Ron changed trade to become an aircraft fitter, and he was initially stationed at Woodburn, which here he is here, at Woodburn, posing with a 250-pound bomb. In early 1943, Ron was deployed overseas to Number 4 Repair Depot in Espirito Santo, also known as Santo, also known as Santos, in the New Hebrides, now Vanuatu. There he spent 12 months working with the Americans and servicing the RNZAF's Kitty Hawks. Personnel in active service were not permitted to keep diaries, but Ron wrote one once the war was over, which he based on letters that he had sent while he was there. It's now kept at the Turnbull Library in Wellington, and it offers really interesting insights into daily life in a camp. And all the direct quotes that I'll use are sourced from that diary. Ron was a handy guy. He was still making and building tools and building fences and generally maintaining his property well into old age. His diary entries demonstrate that this had really always been the case. He talks about building furniture, building water boilers, coffee makers, a spouting system for his hut, a washing machine, and other devices that he knocked together to make life in the Pacific more comfortable. And considering his bent for ingenuity and construction, it's really no surprise that Ron also turned his hand to making decorative items in his spare time. So while he was in Santo, Ron mentions that he made buttons and bangles and napkin rings from coconut shell and ivory nut and bamboo. He also describes going into the jungle to collect seeds to make into necklaces. He made 20 to send back to friends in New Zealand. Ron wasn't alone in making these, and he records that they were popular items for purchase among the American servicemen. The going rate being $2 per necklace, and other items were lucrative too. So several of the boys have sent to New Zealand for souvenirs such as tikis, kiwis, etc., made of silver or in leatherwork. They sell them to the Yanks for about 3 times their New Zealand price. There were other ways to turn some profit as well. Other popular things to sell to the Americans were cigarettes and beer. And Ron talks about 4 of his campmates who were busted for brewing something called jungle juice that they sold to the Americans, some of whom got sick. The brewers were put up in court. One of them was sentenced to some time in Fiji, where he helped to build the prison he was in. And actually, when he returned, there's a shade of envy, because it sounds like everyone thought he had a better time than the guys who stayed back. Ron stayed on Santo until early February 1944, when he returned to Wellington. In January 1945, he embarked on his second tour, and this time Ron was based at Number 12 Servicing Unit in Henderson Field on Guadalcanal in the Solomons for 5 months, where he was maintaining Lockheed Venturas. Following that, he was posted to Jacquinot Bay in New Britain, which is now part of Papua New Guinea, where he remained with Number 3 Servicing Unit, working with the RNZAF Corsairs until November 1945. We understand that the items in the museum's collection date from Ron's second overseas deployment, and the conditions under which they were made were a bit different to those in his first tour. Not long after arriving in Guadalcanal, Ron notes in his diary that the rules had changed since the last time he was away. So making and selling things to the Americans was now prohibited. He wasn't sure why, despite it having been a great hobby overseas. The Yanks weren't subject to, he always calls the Americans the Yanks, weren't subject to the same restrictions. In fact, Ron adds that they were even encouraged in that direction. It seems that New Zealand has found a workaround here, though, by supplying the Americans with the merchandise. At least half the stuff they sell is made by our boys on the sly. Ron also found that the raw materials that he'd used for his hobby on Santo weren't so available in Guadalcanal. Unfazed and in the manner characteristic of trench art, he turned to a range of surplus materials and other scavenged everyday products. He repurposed these materials with the aid of hacksaws, small files and drills, a brace of paper and metal polish, and obviously these were available to him in his role in the servicing unit workshops. So this is a piece of aircraft bracing wire. It's a general airframe component. It's been used in both of these paper knives to form the blades. We've got 303 bullets and cartridge cases on the right hand side, and the striped handle on the left is made of stacked and shaped poker chips. The red paint features in quite a lot of the exact same shade of paint. It features in quite a lot of Ron's output, including here on these tie pins. Now these have been scaled up for visibility, but these are made of from coins, and they're tiny. Ron has filed the birds from here a florin, and the sixpence, the hui from the sixpence, the clubs from the threepence, and the figure from the shilling. Duralumin, or Dural, is an aluminium copper alloy used in the aviation industry. It was developed by the Germans. They used it in the aircraft skins and frames during World War I, and was subsequently adopted more widely and used in airships. It hardens slowly. It's a property that would make it convenient to work and shape, and it appears in several of Ron's designs, usually as a component, but here it's the principal material and the only necklace in our collection. So there are 3 teardrop shapes at the base here. Ron worked in acrylic often as well, and here we see an engraved acrylic ring with a Pacific scene on the face. And Ron made wide use of power shell, which he attached to mounts of stainless steel and dural and bakelite or acrylic. He gathered the shells, a bit of foresight here, he gathered the shells from Lyell Bay and Wellington between his postings, fossicking specifically so he would have some material to work with when he returned to the Pacific. It seems he wasn't the only person to have a supply of power shells, and he was fortunate to have collected enough for his own use, because he notes that some others have brought more with them than they want and are selling them for $1 each. We have a coffin-shaped pendant on the left here on a chain. This is a group of buttons. On the back they are signed. Ron signs most of his material, RH. And a dural ring at the base. Another tie pin here, using the same flower motif in this pendant and the tie pin, and a bracelet here inset with power with a hook and eye catch. Several of Ron's designs directly reference the places where he was stationed, and this engraved plexiglass panel shows the approximate route that he took on his second tour, sailing from New Zealand to Espirito Santo, marked in red, then to Guadalcanal, and then later flying to New Britain. It wasn't a particularly pleasant trip, actually. He outlines that one in his diary. Others represent particular places again. When Ron was in Jacquinot Bay, the Australians he was basically working with the Australians, so there would probably been a ready market for an item such as this, picking out the main Australian cities. But then we have a distinctly New Zealand object here with this acrylic heitiki. While still in the RNZAF at the end of the war, Ron was employed on behalf of the National Airways Corporation, and he was stationed at Hobsonville, where he worked on the Sunderlands. He went on to have a long career as an aircraft engineer with the NAC and thence Air New Zealand, and was responsible for body structure at their engineering workshops here at Christchurch Airport. He retired in 1976. When Ron died in 2021, at the age of 109, he was New Zealand's oldest person. In the later years of his life, He was helped by a dedicated group of carers who provided companionship and assistance that enabled him to remain in his own home. Principal among these folks was Ron's friend and neighbour, Mike Beard, who has put together a book about Ron's life, featuring accounts from many of the people who knew him. Mike's book is available in our shop, and we're pleased to have Mike in the audience today. You can see Ron's work on display in our Horizon to Horizon gallery. He's pictured here at his 108th birthday party, which we threw a bit of a bash for here. And if you have a look for this outline of Ron, he's in the gallery by his own work. Overall, Ron's exacting eye, proficiency with tools, and general ingenuity combined to see him create a distinctive collection of objects, and the Air Force Museum is fortunate to have them in its collection. His work is a summary of the means and the motivations and the methods that result in trench art. A few references there. If you want to follow up Ron's diary, these are the particulars. And thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.